Greetings, Clausewitz here. So this is the first part of my new video series about steel. First of all, why I choose the subject steel is, I mean, it was and is an important material in human societies, and it was a technology level marker actually in history, and was a necessary basic for further improvements, and of course it plays a very important role in warfare throughout thousands of years. But actually other methods too, and other materials like wood or like fabrics like bronze and other methods, and even simultaneously with steel. So it's not mainly about the importance of steel in history. I mainly choose now steel as my first material subject because I want to talk about bronze and other stuff too, but it's the main reason is because I see so many misunderstandings and misconceptions and misinformation or missing informations about steel when there are discussions in HEMA about this material. And I'm not happy with the state of definitions of terminologies, I can't reden, of certain terms, of certain names, and so I want to clear things up. I want to give more insight in the subject to really and to make things straight, like some of these misconceptions I mentioned. So I will start now with the definition of steel, what steel actually is. So steel is a metal, like basically everyone knows, this sword is made out of steel. And what is funny is that there isn't actually a good basic definition of steel. There is some industrial material definitions of steel, but there's nothing nothing strongly from this chemistry perspective. And this is really awful, I think, because some sources claim that steel is an alloy between mainly iron, some carbon, and not over 2% or 2.06% of carbon, and with some other materials. This is steel. And other claim steel is this and that, or steel is steel when it's quenched and when it's hardened, and this drives me crazy. We have so many definitions about different steel alloys, like steel in combination with chrome, for example, or with other metals. There we have hundreds of definitions, like with stainless steel and normal high carbon steel, like how it's called. But I want a basic definition and more of this whole chemistry viewpoint. And it's actually pretty simple because, and this definition is necessary, I'll explain later. Because I claim now this basic definition that steel is this connection between iron and carbon. And it doesn't matter how high this carbon amount is, but it matters that this connection is in place. Because now we have all these characteristics we actually see in steel, in every steel alloy. This spring flexibility, like I bend this blade here and it springs back to its shape, in combination with additional hardness, like the ability or the possibility to alter all these characteristics in a certain way. Like I can make steel much more harder, I can make it more flexible, I can make it softer, so on and so on. And so this is why I say it's a basic definition, because there are other substances in steel actually when you produce it, like there is phosphor in it, for example, or magnesium, whatever, but actually this is not important for the characteristics of steel. When you have some of it in, it actually doesn't matter, and if you have too high amounts of it in, it actually is now what we call slag, and now it's not pure enough and it can get broken through it because it is an impurity inside of the actual steel, inside of this connection between iron and carbon. So, and why it's now important? The thing is, so often I read and I hear, or I heard, and I think you too, that when some smith or even somebody in HEMA is talking about like a sword or like a weapon, and he is like, or a history of it, and he's like, oh, this part is made out of iron and this is made out of steel, for example, or this feature, this maybe something more decorative is made of iron, and or in the first place they used iron after bronze or with bronze, and later on they had steel. And this isn't true. They didn't use iron, because iron is extremely soft, by the way, pure iron. If I would use pure iron for a sword, this would be rubbish and would bend, really with the hit would bend, and I think that nothing would happen. Maybe if we would make the lever very long, maybe then it really would injure somebody with it slightly, but I would have a strong bent weapon. I actually don't think that would even hurt him. But the thing is, they didn't have iron. They weren't even able to produce pure iron. And so important to know for this in background is when you want to produce steel, or what they call maybe sometimes iron, they now used iron ore in the case of Europe. Mainly there are some different cases, like Japan used iron sand, which is similar. It's not like the same, but the point is it's also iron oxide. This is the point. Iron ore contains iron oxides and other materials combined into this iron ore. And now when you put it in the oven, you actually melt down the not iron oxide parts and reduce the oxide in this connection between iron and oxide, reduce the oxide and now combine it with carbon. And so from this chemistry viewpoint, even iron ore don't have it's really proved. It is a fact. Iron ore don't have iron in it. It has iron oxides. And when you then put it through this process, you never have iron, you then have steel, because now you have steel in connection with carbon instead of like the iron oxide before with oxygen. So now this is the point, and it depends on the heat and on the heating materials and additional materials they would put in the oven, that you now have the specific amount of carbon. Because low carbon steel, yeah, can be relatively soft, not as soft as pure iron, but you had never iron. When a smith told you like something like, oh, this part, just take this part, in this case it's normal steel, but like, oh, this part was or is made of iron. He just means, and I'm pretty sure that many smiths don't even know this, but actually he means that this is made of low carbon steel, or not heat treated steel, or both cases. And but it is steel actually, because now we came to this point. We have now this combination of these two things. We have of these two elements. We have iron and carbon. Now have steel with new characteristics. And now we alter these characteristics depending on like the amount of carbon actually, but even a high carbon would also already make the steel harder. And now we heat treating, we forging, we purifying, every this stuff to get the result we actually want. Because for some things you want harder steel, for other things you want softer steel, and for things you want like flexibility and stuff like that. And even combine all these things together. And so this is my main point with this terminology. No, there isn't iron in steel processing. There isn't. Every term you hear about this whole steel subject in historical terms, and even sometimes modern, or often modern in steel industry. But let us stick to the history context. When you hear the word iron, they mean low carbon steel and not heat treated steel. Because they didn't have iron. It's impossible with their methods. They produced steel that they could have iron out of it. And even, like I mentioned, the raw material didn't have pure iron in it. I just want this made clear. Every time you hear something with it like pig iron or this iron or direct reduced iron, it's every time steel. It's not iron anymore, or even doesn't even was iron in the first place. And yeah, so this is this point about iron, and I mentioned pig iron because pig iron was just melted steel. It was like a byproduct of steel making, because ovens were really effective now. They could run, could reach really high temperatures, and now some of the steel melted in this process, and now they had what they called pig iron. And even it was called in other regions the same way, like in Germany it was called Saueisen, which is the same word. And because in the first place they couldn't use it anymore, it was too brittle, the carbon amount was too high. And they figured out later on when they heat treated it and they couldn't like reduce the carbon and now could forge it, could weld it or whatever, could use it in smith processing. And but this would include more work, so it was like a negative byproduct. Later on they figured out better methods even in producing to really produce at first melted steel and then make it to the product they desired. But this is the thing, it's all the times steel. So another point which I hear often about and is just misunderstanding or misinformations, and it's about when in historical context really steel comes in place for like weapon production or was widespread. And I mean we had steel relatively early on actually in Europe, like the Hittites culture in like modern Turkey, they were settled, actually produced steel, even hardened steel, pretty early, like 2500 before Christ, so BC, but it wasn't so widespread at this time. Like Egypt used bronze, and later on the Greeks and Romans used bronze, and like really later, so 2000 years later I think or so, they really started to use, so not exactly 2000 years, but over 1,000 years later, really Europe used now steel. And I don't want to talk about how it was spread. I think it's pretty obvious that like the most of this technology spread around from the Hittites, and where they get it from, it's not the subject of this video. So the point is that when it comes in place, steel, we see like it was used for many weapons or almost every weapon, and but bronze was still used for armor. And I heard the reason why they used now so much steel, or why they used steel in the first place, or iron, like they called it, is because it was like mass produced. They could mass produce it, like more amounts of it. It was better as bronze, or maybe even reverse, but you could make just so many of it. And this is just wrong. I don't know where they get this from actually, because the point about steel is you need a specific temperature at least to reduce the oxygen in the iron oxides in the iron ore. And you don't need this, and you need even a lesser temperature than that. I think it's like 800 to 900 degrees Celsius is what you need to reduce the oxygen in iron ore, also in iron oxides. But when I remember correctly, you need like 600 degree, or between 600 and 700, at least the same or even lesser amount of heat to melt bronze or to produce bronze. By the way, bronze is an alloy between copper and tin, or the connection between both metals. And the point is, you produce bronze through melting, and in lesser temperatures then you produce the raw steel. And this is my point. When I make this raw steel with this temperature, I don't even can make big amounts of it, because if I would add more iron ore in the oven, I would lose the heat. So I actually can do small amounts of iron ore, I mean, and steel therefore, and then weld them together to use them now for other pieces or whatever. So actually it takes longer. I kind of need to destroy the oven and always, because I have to really close it. And the point is, now I have this raw steel. I need to purify it. I need to now forge it in form and in the desired design I want to, and heat treated it, and many things can go wrong, especially in this heat treating. And when I look at bronze, actually I produce bronze already in this melting process. It's pretty easy to melt it, and now I can cast it in a form, and I don't need to heat treat it. Actually, it doesn't even do anything, if I remember correctly, but the point is, I then cast it in a form. I can actually cast it every blade in its form like it should look like, and then hammer it maybe some details, and I hammer it down to make it denser, to make it harder. Like for the edges I really hammer it down multiple times. So this is actually all I have to do basically to produce like bronze weapons. And for armor it's pretty easy to make armor out of bronze, because like for helmet I make a basic helm from it and then hammer it in form. Nothing can happen, because even if I have steel, every time I heat steel up I lose carbon. I can't like forge steel forever. I need to make it in a specific time so that I don't lose all the carbon in it and lose hardness, or even this flexibility to this, so it gets softer and softer as long as I put it up at high heats. And I don't have this problem with bronze. Bronze don't rust, and bronze don't need to be maintained so much, and I can actually repair bronze pretty easily because I can melt it down again if it's necessary. I can't do this with steel because the temperature to melt steel is like 1536 or so degree and Celsius. And so actually from an industrial viewpoint, bronze is the better choice actually. And the early steels actually don't perform so much better than bronze. Basically a bronze sword and a steel sword in the same design would perform with this low carbon steel pretty similar. And we have these accounts of Celtic swords, which were actually longer than other swords in Europe, like not longer as Greek swords and longer as Roman swords. And when they hit something, actually the swords also bend like bronze weapons. But I have to say, they bend because they were longer. Because Gladius or Khopesh, Xyphos didn't bend not as much on the same scale, because it was in comparison to bronze swords, because bronze swords and even short sword designs bend, especially when they hit something hard like bones or armor, just through this using. And especially when you fight in a battle over and over again, as hours, and you use a bronze weapon, it bends and bends and bends, and you have to switch it around so to bend back, or you have to bend it back. And now you have steel, this doesn't happen, so it is okay, it's an advantage, but also you have to maintain the sword or the weapon itself. Actually, really steel weapons get more advantages more throughout the